We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which the podcast was made, the Yuggera and Turrbal peoples. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the land's first storytellers and their deep connection to the lands, waters and seas. We pay our respects to elders, past and present.
Wanyari gaming garulko ya Yagarajarana.
Good looks like lots of different things. Good looks like having our traditional foods available to us. Good looks like being able to connect to our culture without, any conversation about equity or, special treatment. Good looks like our communities feeling like they can celebrate, they can teach their culture, that people feel really strong in who they are.
After the referendum, I have to admit I was gutted. I felt like Australia didn't have our back anymore. And so part of this, for me, is how we get together, how we activate ourselves. We have great professionals in every field. We have bureaucrats, we have community mob that have got wisdom. We've got everything that we need in the package to do this ourselves, but we need to be activated and we need to do that ourselves.
Local realities need local solutions, because change doesn't start in Parliament House. It starts here, on country, in communities where the stories are real, the struggles are lived, and the solutions are created from the ground up. Every place has its own truth. From desert towns to saltwater coastlines, mob are facing different realities. But one thing connects them all: history.
Self-determination for me is me being able to tell my story the way I want to tell it, teaching people who don't have an understanding of a story, say like my grandfather's, helping them understand his journey, his connection to country and his, spiritual beliefs prior to colonisation.
The resilience to look after each other, speak up and lead the way forward. Local voices and local solutions. Community leaders, aunties, uncles and young people taking charge and working towards self-determination.
Art is a really great platform to give voice to. And it can be a very powerful one.
This is the Rights Made Real podcast from the Queensland Human Rights Commission. In this Gathering Strength series, you'll hear what actions are having a real impact in communities. I'm Salua Middleton, a proud Torres Strait Islander woman with strong family connections to Erub. Episode 3, Acting, with Kaleb Mabo, Elverina Johnson, and other community members who aren't waiting for permission to take action.
I am Kaleb Mabo. I'm from the Torres Straits, and my clan are the Peer Drum clan of Murray Island. My grandfather is a man by the name of Eddie Mabo. That is on my mother's side. On my father's side, I'm from the Dungutty clan, the mid-north coast of New South Wales.
Eddie Mabo led the campaign for Indigenous land rights in Australia. His work led to the Native Title Act, officially recognising the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia.
I guess my grandfather's legacy, it's enormous. It's an enormous achievement when I reflect back on what he has done, and when I travel around to different communities throughout Australia and see the impact that his fight has had for some of these communities. It really hits home for me. In terms of carrying this legacy on, It's an immense responsibility on my shoulders, something that I don't take lightly, something that I take very seriously, and always looking at how I can further improve the Mabo name or his legacy itself, and how we can bring it more into the light of the everyday Australian.
You recently did some restoring work on Granddad's lamb. What was it that drove you to do that?
So when I returned back to Mara for the first time with my mother, I was sitting by his gravesite and just looking around, and the jungle had kind of taken over. You could see that the king tides have really washed away and eroded certain parts of the beach. And it was in the time leading up to the 25th anniversary of the Mabo decision. And traditionally, there are some certain, we call zogo cub, or sacred dances, that take place at the back where my grandfather was buried. So in order for us to be able to perform those dances at the back, it needed to be restored. So I went on a campaign to restore it, and I guess when I say restore, I guess it's more clearing away invasive species, starting to level the land out a bit more where the sea had eroded it. And yeah, really looking at reconnecting with the space rather than reclaiming it.
Can you give us a sense of what the mood in the community is right now after the dismantling of voice, truth-telling and treaty legislation?
There is a sense of sadness around the community, a bit of loss in like, okay, well, what's the next step? We almost put all of our eggs in one basket with those decisions, and now we sit in this grief and are lost in a direction of where do we go to from here.
Can you go into some of the specifics about like what are the things that you're hearing from mob on that ground? What are they feeling or hoping for or needing?
It was a shared experience. We felt sad. You felt like you didn't belong to a place that you grew up in. A lot of people wouldn't be wanting to leave the house and go to work and do these things. There's a lot of conversations like that about how do we put this grief aside and continue to work in a place where we felt we were no longer wanted.
And what do you think people are hoping for now?
People are still hopeful that a change will come. There's still a lot of hope out there in progression of Australia as a nation. There's still a lot of hope that for the goodness in people's hearts that is still there, but it's trying to understand how do we move forward from this.
How do you ground yourself with the feeling of uncertainty when things are feeling heavy?
Yeah, I guess when I feel uncertain, I connect with country. It's quite, I guess I feel it's quite simple for myself. I go out for a walk. Doesn't matter whose country I'm on, I still pay respects to it. Sit down, connect. We're spiritual people, so it's connecting to those spirits in different ways through land, sea, and just allowing for them to come through and almost take away and any worries you have and help ease your mind and give you a bit of guidance.
I guess the journey that I've led was out of sheer determination, and at the same time I wanted to have and open those pathways for other women. My advice to them is don't be afraid, be confident in yourself, draw upon others.
I always say is that it'll cost me $1 to buy an apple in Brisbane, it'll cost me $20 to buy an apple on Palm Island. And that's the most thing that we need to look at in terms of better food security for our community, better transport access, better housing conditions, and certainly a more economic, robust economy for our communities, which are so important, particularly if we are to build the next generation and give them the best start that they need for the next decade to come or more.
Kaleb Mabo carries the name and legacy of his grandfather's native title victory. He wants Eddie Mabo's history-making campaign to be remembered and understood by new generations, but worries that connection is being lost.
For myself, what I see and have experienced is disconnection to culture. We're slowly losing it, and especially in, I guess, the youth of today, with some of the influences that they have at hand, it really drives a more of a divide between culture and the new world that they're walking in. But in saying that, they're not understanding that by leaving culture behind, they're losing their identity and not being able to understand who they are as a person.
What are those influences?
I guess your social medias, your, I guess no disrespect to anybody, but it's when you look at the demographic of Indigenous Australians, we're losing old people at an alarming rate. When I was a young boy, I'd have elders around that were teaching me and that would help guide learnings for myself. But today's youth are losing grandparents at a really young age, and there aren't any of those old people around anymore that are able to continue that cultural knowledge and lessons passing on.
What does self-determination look like to you in a practical sense?
Self-determination for me is me being able to tell my story the way I want to tell it. Teaching people who don't have an understanding of a story, say like my grandfather's, and helping them understand his journey, his connection to country, and his, I guess, spiritual beliefs prior to colonisation.
If your grandfather was here today, what do you think he'd say about where we're at in 2025?
Big question. I believe that the native title system would look completely different if he were alive when the decision was made. I feel there was a lot more work that was still to come after that decision, and losing him at the time that the decision was made kind of slowed momentum a bit, because there were, I guess, bigger ideas around gaining more autonomy within the region of the Torres Strait.
What's the legacy that you hope to leave in the work that you're doing?
I hope to leave a legacy of education, the power in education, the power in helping others understand or give them an appreciation of what it's like to live as a land-connected person within Australia.
What we've seen here locally in Queensland is we're 5 years now from our health equity legislation, and what we saw from that was Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people placed on our health boards of our hospitals, and now we have 3 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people leading those health boards.
Yeah, I think young people are feeling pretty inspired. We had the youth summit last week, which triggered a lot of deep conversations between everyone. A lot of young people didn't understand much about their rights as a young person.
The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples highlights cultural integrity and preservation. The right to express your culture through art is an important form of advocacy, beauty, and activism.
Wanjirana Ibama Kunganji Melvarina from Yarrabah, Kunganji woman and Wallabaradinji as well on my grandmother's side. I live in Yarrabah, which is about 60 kilometres southeast of Cairns. It's the home of the Kunganji people, my people.
Elverina Johnson says the impact of her artworks in galleries and on clothing is a way of connecting people to share stories. She says it's a form of truth-telling, especially for mob who don't have their voices heard.
Art is a really great platform to give voice to, and it can be a very powerful one. And depending on what stories you want to tell, whether it be have a more cultural context or just story-based in terms of your life growing up, or it can have a political stance as well in terms of your expressions of Indigenous rights can also come through those art forms as well, whether it be visual arts, music, or other performances. But it's certainly a very good space to be able to give voice to some of those issues.
Is art activism, is protecting culture a form of resistance?
Look, I think, yes, it does and it can. And you can have a kind of a soft approach to the type of activism you want to do through art, whether it's just more about storytelling and emphasizing the history of who you are and your people and your community, or it can be specifically on certain types of topics or issues that you want to talk about through your art.
Do you see the fight to protect culture, language, songlines and ceremony as a human rights issue?
Definitely. It's part of who we are. It's part of our struggle, but also our originality in terms of where we come from and our identity. And I think that if we don't keep telling those stories and emphasizing those cultural stories or, the history of our people and our community, then it gives us more of a reason why we have to protect it and to keep fighting for the right to have those voices out there and not only telling our own personal stories, but telling the stories of our elders, our communities, and our cultural practices. And it is a human rights issue because it's part of who we are. And if we don't keep telling those stories, it can be very easy to be forgotten and easy to say, oh, well, your story is not important because you don't talk about it much. So yeah, it's pretty much our signature.
Is it about maintaining that connection not only for your stories but also for the wider community to connect with those stories from community?
Maintaining the stories, but also having use it as a education tool, and also to keep stories alive. So in a lot of my art, I'm very influenced by my community and the land and the sea, and stories that I grew up learning and practicing which helps me to talk about my community, my elders, and what they taught me. So it's important to be able to continue to pass that on, but also show what I've had the opportunity to be given as well from my ancestors, my grandparents. Yeah, I think if you stop doing that, then you risk the next generation not learning.
Listening to the change makers and the trailblazers who have done a lot of work in our communities. There's a lot to learn from, especially as being a young person, and just really be here to ground ourselves and remind ourselves why we continue to do what we do.
Last year when the new government came in, we started our truth-telling, and the government said no to that initiative, and we as a community said no. We're going to dictate our truth. We're going to dictate the good stuff and the important stuff that we need to share. And so currently we have a group of elders, Sherbig Elders Advisory Group, that are telling their truth, and also other family members as well.
Indigenous-led climate action, why all of a sudden Indigenous people are being asked for this knowledge is that there's an awareness that we've lived and survived a couple of these extinction periods that we're faced with. So them fellas must have that knowledge.
From climate change to land rights, the ability to act on priorities set by First Nations peoples is crucial to self-determination. Visual art is a prominent way of keeping Indigenous voices heard across all communities. Elverina Johnson is based in Yarrabah, but her artwork on canvases and catwalks is seen across the country.
Last year I did 3 large portraits of my grandmother's story, and each of those portraits told a different story of her experience as a young girl in the dormitory system, and the impact that's had on me doing that story kind of came to life, and the realities of what my grandmother had to deal with as a young girl, being taken from her parents and into the dormitory system and being treated, basically as domestic slaves and stuff, but also being punished for not doing what the superintendents wanted them to do. So one of the stories is about punishment. So the portrait is of my grandmother sitting or standing and with the head shaved. So her head was shaved, the hair below her on the ground. That was more about the fact that because she didn't do what she was supposed to do, what they wanted her to do, they shaved her head and shaved all her hair off as punishment. So it was a three series of paintings. The other one was I called Bones. So this was about that when they were hungry, they didn't have anything to eat, so they had to wait for the chicken bones to be thrown out the window of the old kitchen places. So when they got the old chicken bones, they would get them and crush them and grind them up, and that became their meal. So things like that kind of have a real impact on you as the artist and your family, but also it's that kind of truth-telling that's easy for people to see and visualize a little bit more than when you tell the story, because they can actually see it and they can see this is what happened. And I think the impact of that is great. There's nothing, left for the imagination. It's there. So what you've been told and what you've learned is now being visualized.
How do you balance being an artist and an activist, or are they one and the same?
I mean, people think I'm an activist, or they call me an activist. Maybe I see myself differently. I've done my 3rd collaboration with Taking Shape clothing store, And so my artwork on there is a lot different to the stories that I told and painted about my grandmother. So these artworks on clothing are a lot more about me growing up and what influenced me to be who I am. And amazingly, and I've used that tool as a way to educate people so that when they're wearing the clothes, it prompts questions. And I've actually had that. So I've had a lot of people, Indigenous, non-Indigenous people, who have messaged me and sent photos and said, they've never heard any of these stories or been educated in this way about Indigenous people from the process of wearing something with your artwork on and the little label that tells the story. People have said they've never heard of Yarrabah until they've seen the artwork. They didn't know about the connection to reef and rainforests until they've worn something and been educated about it just through the artwork. So people have certainly been affected and impacted by, for me, which is a soft approach as opposed to the other paintings I've done. So there's different ways of educating people, whether it be come in really hard or just a more gentle approach where people can actually enjoy what you're wearing but be educated by what you're wearing as well.
Acting, local realities and local solutions. With thanks to our guests, Kaleb Mabo and Elverina Johnson. In episode 4, Dreaming, what do we want for our future? For First Nations peoples, the answer is shaped by culture, truth, and the priorities communities have been calling out for generations. From Uluru to The Voice, what's next? Gathering Strength is a podcast series where I yarn with First Nations community members about how to promote and protect their human rights. It's supported by the Queensland Human Rights Commission. Do make sure you're following Rights Made Real so you don't miss an episode of this Gathering Strength series. You can also head to the Queensland Human Rights Commission website to find out more. This talking episode featured Menawala, Dr. Mark Wenatong, Vonda Malone, Alf Lacey, Dr. Alicia Vesey, Manny Williams, Bruce Simpson and Suzanne Thompson. Rights Made Real is supported by the Queensland Human Rights Commission and produced by Dead Set Studios. Our executive producer is Kelly Reardon, supervising producer is Rebecca Livingston, and editor is Liam Reardon. Theme music was composed by Clay Casadale, and I'm Salua Middleton.